This piece of legislation is just another debacle in the whole long and sorry water charges saga. As we all remember, and as Fianna Fáil would like us to forget, the water charges fiasco began with Fianna Fáil and their inability to stand up to the Troika. Fianna Fáil accepting, as they did then, almost every ridiculous, divisive and debilitating demand from the Troika, agreed to impose water charges at the Troika's request. The demand for such charges was in effect as clear a commentary on the atrocious legacy of the underfunding of vital utilities such as water by successive Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael governments. Up to now, most of the narrative around the justification for setting up Irish Water centred on placing blame on local authorities for the condition of the water infrastructure. It is unfair to blame entirely local authorities for the issues they've been bedevilled the provision of water to Irish households and businesses. Many local authorities did Trojan work, maintaining the water infrastructure and providing clean, drinkable water to houses, even though they were restricted by underinvestment by central government. The government at the time and now could have then and can now, with additional targeted funding, make provision for the sort of additional capital infrastructure required to improve and upgrade the water infrastructure. Imagine what the enormous sums spent on consultants to Irish Water or the hugely expensive water metering project could accomplish if this money had been allocated to invest in the maintaining and upgrading of our water infrastructure. Setting up Irish Water and transferring assets and personnel from local authorities was another huge cost which could have been avoided and should never have happened. Sinn Féin and the Executive in the North ensured that a major package was made available in the North to invest in the North's water infrastructure. Such investment meant that there was no need to introduce water charges in the North. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, on the other hand, were clearly committed to introducing water charges here in the South, as demonstrated by Fianna Fáil's agreement with the Troika and by Fine Gael in its manifesto commitments. The tens of thousands that came onto the streets to oppose water charges clearly showed that your parties were on the wrong side of not just history, but what is right. Have you not learnt anything? The bill before the Dáil raises a number of concerns, not just in what it says, but what it does not say, as well as in the lack of clarity on some important issues, which I will discuss shortly. I am also concerned that the legislation is complex and has been rushed through the Dáil without proper scrutiny. The wording of the bill even seems to have disregarded recommendations from Special Commission on Water. There are no references in this legislation to key recommendations of the report from the committee. Additionally, there is no reference in the bill to the conservation measures recommended by the Commission. Some concerns I have with the bill is how the government will decide to calculate what they regard as excessive use and what allowance will be available for households. The way the bill is framed raises a real concern that over time the government will lower the allowance, as well as the threshold for the allowance over time. The bill makes provision for the recalculation of the threshold amount. Another concern I have is that the threshold amount cannot exceed 1.7. I see a real difficulty rising around this in the future as a consequence of the restricted nature of the powers of the Minister set out in this bill. The Minister has the power, it seems, to reduce the threshold amount down from 1.7, but not to raise the threshold about that 1.7. There is a real possibility that after 5 years, households could be paying significantly higher amounts for what would be regarded as above the allowance as determined by the Minister, having reduced the threshold. This effectively, it can be argued, leaves the door open for a return to water charges in the future by stealth. Is the government being mischievous or duplicitous in restricting the Minister's powers in this respect? I can only determine that the legislation is framed to allow a future government, whether Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, to increase charges. Additionally, if you read the bill, there is no distinction made for the number of people in a household. A household can have 3 or 4 children or teenagers. It would not be beyond imagination that this would be a domestic situation where a household could use significantly more water, and reasonably so. So a family like this could be severely disadvantaged because its allowances do not reflect the everyday reality of having a house full of young children or teenagers. A family in this circumstance could pay heavily for this imbalance in the perception of what is an ordinary household. Families will also be penalised because charges will be based on household and not on individual usage. This gives rise to a related problem. That is, how to tell how much water a household is actually using. Certain households are metered and others are not. In fact, 42% of households do not have a meter. How can the government determine the average household use of water if only a percentage of households are metered? And I'm not arguing for a metering of houses, but in the context of the logic of this bill. You cannot get a true or accurate average with limited information. So the average the government will work from will be a skewed average and could adversely affect a household threshold and its allowance. I must also point out that the very idea of excessive water usage is a false idea, one that Fianna Fáil and the government are happy to accept. I would like to see evidence of this water wastage that Fianna Fáil and the government speak of. I don't believe you have the evidence of water wastage. Why? Because it simply does not happen. Irish Water's own figures show that Irish household water consumption is one of the lowest in the OECD. But when Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael were both determined to introduce water charges, what did this logic and this data matter? The sad fact is that they actually didn't have to introduce water charges. Ireland's exemption in the Water Services Directive could have got them off the hook. If that's what they wanted, they could have funded water charges directly through general taxation. And remember, Minister, in America, in Detroit, water was used to put people out of their homes. It's like the new gold in terms of the way it's being used. And there's no doubt that people's power has forced you to do a backtrack on some of the more excessive ideas you have in regards to water charges. And I also remember that when I was on the local authorities and bin charges were introduced, and both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael supported them and looked for waivers for senior citizens. And where are those waivers now? Where are those promises that politicians make? And politicians can come and go. And that's the problem. Politicians come and go, the rules change. What is the fear of a referendum on water, to keep water in public ownership? What is the fear of it? Surely that would send out a strong message that you have no intentions, or you never had any intentions, to privatise. A lot of people think differently. Tá méid gine an bille seo, tá imní oran go bhfuil taille isce ag teacht tríd an cúil doras.
Thank you, Deputy.